RN, your world unfolding. Welcome back to Life Matters, William.
How are you?
It's like having a 5-year-old in the studio.
Well, it is like a steroid-enhanced
Fidget,
5-year-old fidget. Yes, it's nice to be here. Thank you.
I have to say, laughing clowns, the laughing clowns at the show were the most scary, macabre things. This could be the makings of a horror story.
It is a bit scary, isn't it? I was a bit dodgy about them when I was a kid, but I was sucked in by every player wins a prize. I think they knew there was a certain range of the population that had some sort of phobic response to them. So they just sort of, everyone's a winner. You'll get some useless bit of plastic, even if you sort of, you don't get the correct numbers.
I think there's actually a phobia associated with clowns, an authentic phobia.
I'm sure there is. I mean, I don't think they wanted to... I suggested when the book was being, printed, maybe they should just have some laughing clowns on the front. And they said, no, clowns are bad. There's a large section of people who have problem with... I mean, I have problems with people dressed up in things. I mean, when I was a kid, my mother took me off. I was bitching about not having anything to do during school holidays, like whinging. She said, oh, all right. Firstly, she tied me to a tree. I watched a Tony Curtis movie about Harry Houdini, when he gets punched in the tummy and then he dies upside down when he's all tied up in the aquarium. And that inspired me to try and become an escapologist. And I said, look, can you tie me to the tree, a gum tree in the back, and
this
gag
was fun
me?
and games.
Yeah, and Mum said, oh, fantastic, I'll try and get out. And she said, terrific, he's found a way to entertain himself. So she basically bound me to the tree, and then a toad about the size of my small fingernail jumped on my foot, and I went completely crazy because I have a terribly...
A toad phobia.
A phobic response to toads. And my mother thought that I was really getting into it, and she clapped her hands and she said, well, jazz it up with a bit of music. So she stuck it on off Q, which was the racing station or the country music station up in Brisbane. So between race calls and Sink the Bismarck, I nearly strangled myself before she realised what was going on. But I got that one out of the way, and then I said, well, I've got nothing to do. She said, well, I'll fix you up. And there was a shopping centre in Brisbane called Toombul. And, we were the sort of family that would go to opening of shopping centres. That was a big event out. And she signed me in when I was about 11 to the Paddle Pop Lion Fun Hour. And, the Paddle Pop Lion was a sort of hand-me-down Humphrey B. Bear, it was this shaggy lion. And I went off, and I was the tallest. I was taller than the Paddle Pop Lion. And I was the oldest kid there by about 6 years, I think. And my mother thought it was very funny because someone said the kid must be simple. So Paddle Pop paid a lot of attention to me, and my mother was laughing her head off.
I'm trying to work out where the clown fits in here.
Bored now, are you, Willie?
I have to say, though, your son is on the inside cover of this book. He's staring down a line of clowns.
Yeah.
He's now in first year university.
Yes,
he's
he
a
is.
Little boy in that picture.
He's a huge
not
human
anymore.
being. No, he's 6'6", prime Queensland beef. Well, he's Victorian beef, really, from the loins of a Queensland beef, which is me.
What's family life been like for you in the past year?
It's been all right. I mean, it's like anyone who has someone very important to them die way too early for the family's liking. But you sort of tend to hunker down and just get on with things, really. I mean, there's no way of dealing with it. You cannot teach people to handle grief or grieving. I mean, that's one thing. Anyone who goes through it will understand, I think.
There are all sorts of strange expectations about grief.
Yeah, I mean, there is. But we all die. And I guess her great gift, Sarah, was to make her death, it was not less painful, but less mysterious and less scary when she died at home. And she wanted to do that. I think that in some way made it seem more natural, which is what it is. I mean, not many people like talking about death. Not many people like understanding that we all have a finite time in a physical sense, I guess, and whatever your faith system is. But on one level, we cease to exist one day, and that can be terribly scary. But she went a long way to making us understand that that's a part of life. I mean, my parents have died. I've spent a lot of time lighting, candles of remembrance in a quiet moment or two, lighting way too many for my liking, for a guy who's been very fortunate and lucky in his life.
She prepared you, Sarah prepared you.
Yes, she did.
In ways that perhaps you didn't realise until now after she's died.
Yeah, but in ways that I probably only realise, for how, when some sort of little dawn of realisation strikes me that's what she was doing. I mean, people who I mean, and just because, you don't want to sort of give us a rating to people. That's the worst thing you can do. It's like when someone has cancer, they battle cancer.
I
It's
refuse
the
to
biggest
use that
blank,
word.
I mean, you don't. No, it's not a battle. It's not a competition. Just because someone survives longer when they live with cancer, it doesn't mean they're a winner or they're a gold medalist. I mean, that sort of thing is infuriating, and it's a cliche that lots of people fall into. But she did. She did prepare us, I guess, and I think the kids really got the benefit of that. But you don't know.
Because your daughter's, she's in year 8?
She's in year 8, but the schools where she goes to and my son went to were wonderful. They were terribly good, and we had a great group of friends. And even though you like to think you're by yourself, you're never really alone. We were very fortunate like that.
Well, you drew it to you, really.
Well, I don't know, but I mean,
and lived a very public life.
Yeah,
you really put it out there, didn't you? Your relationship
yes
and romance.
No. Yeah, well, I think that was that book that Worst Things Happen at Sea. I mean, some of her writings are sublime in that. I think she wanted to say stuff for her kids and for her family and for the people who knew her and for people who didn't. And I think I'm not that proud of what I've done, really. I mean, it's just a bit of good fortune. It's usually how it comes out of the hand for me. But that is something I'm really inordinately proud of. And, it was a terrific book. And it was a great testament to her. And she's not someone who needs to be looked after now that she's dead. Her reputation does that.
Stands alone.
Yeah, I'm not in the process of sort of legend building, but she was a glorious human being.
Let's come to Laughing Clowns.
Yes, and your serious voice like that. She doesn't actually talk like that usually. She talks like that. Now she's talking like that.
I know you do a good piss take of politicians.
I watched Late Line last night. It was the battle of the funny voices. It was Craig Emerson and Christopher Pine. I mean, really, God. It was like... It is a parliament of funny voices, isn't it?
You love politics.
Well,
but
it is.
Or do you love to hate it? I wonder.
No. I have a. Politics
you actually
is okay.
adore it.
I mean,
is it the laughing clown aspect of it, the vaudevillian aspect?
Sometimes
of
it's like
Parliament?
Every player wins a prize, and it's one of. No, I think this parliament's done a lot. It's a hung parliament, but it's achieved a lot of legislation, good or bad. It would mean it works, which is interesting. And all this kerfuffle now is just game playing and tactics, I guess, on both sides. But,
there's always been game playing and tactics.
This is a little bit more
Joe and
heightened,
Flo in Queensland. You lived through the era.
Joe, yeah. You shouldn't be saying that, you. Got that great line he said, you fly with the crows and you squawk like the crows and you get shot with the dingoes. He used to do that on purpose, I reckon.
Speaking of things absurd, laughing clowns.
But we didn't do the funny voices in Parliament.
Oh, go on.
Well, I can't do them now. You've so thrown me off.
Well, give us the voice of Peter Kennedy. He's at the heart of this story. He's approaching 50. He's heavy-bellied. He's got bad knees. He's been married to Kate for 25 years. Who is he?
Oh, I don't know. Someone accused me of having a very low spectrum of creativity. That's the phrase they used. And I said, what do you mean? He says, when you write fiction, well, I've only written, this is the second novel I've written, but said all your main protagonists are big, noisy men who can't communicate properly. I went, maybe. But he's a guy who is plugged into every conceivable technological piece of communication. He's a guy who can be contacted anywhere on his own terms. And he has one of those men who have that practiced inability to use the phone when it suits them. But when they need to access technology to communicate, usually for business, usually to get something done, they can. And I think...
He's an architect, but he's sort of not, and here's a word, he's a conceptualist.
Yeah, a conceptualist development manager, which means he comes up with ideas where you could develop something or how you could develop it, or if there's a problem developing it. It's one of those things that a really affluent economy produces, an occupation which actually has no real tangible use, but yet it turns a lot of coin. And I think in a world which is changing quite rapidly, that idea of making something, a lot of profit out of nothing, is sort of quite fascinating.
I do like, though, how the dog Bingo calls him the big one.
Yeah.
Dogs have a kind of way of humbling us, I think. But Peter Kennedy is heading back home to Pickersgill, which sounds awfully like Redcliffe, where you grew
Where I
up.
grew up,
Are
yeah,
the
well, it
locals
is.
going to go, yeah, well, it is good.
No,
I'm glad you've come clean on that.
I was going to set it in Redcliffe because I wrote a cricket book about a novel about cricket, which wasn't really about cricket, it was about lots of things. But I set it where I live in Melbourne, and the people that live in that suburb really liked that book. They, people said this. I wrote about a building inspector, and my wife Sarah said, "You're crazy. You can't. You haven't even disguised him."
He's
I
a
said,
"Subject of hatred."
Don't worry about it. He won't know. And when he came, we were doing a reno, and he came up and he had to okay it. And I went, "Hi, mate." He said, "Yeah, good to see you again, William. Mate, can you just autograph that page where I appear?" I went, "All right."
Redcliffe, it's about an hour out of Brisbane. I'm just wondering who needs a novel when you've actually got real life places like Humpy Bong Park and Deception Bay.
Oh, I know, but I mean, I was going to set it there because I wanted to do the same thing I did with where I live in Melbourne, in the western suburbs. I wanted to sort of celebrate. Oh, I hate that word celebrate. It's always a sort of get out of town.
We'll use
thing.
it anyway. It's like Journey.
Celebrate. To sort of glory in it, because I think it's a nice thing about when you write a book about or you tell a story about a place, and you're just sort of happy to be there, and you write about it, so you're telling stories. We cop that all the time from overseas. That's why those stupid bloody whodunits always say. People think, "Oh, wouldn't it be wonderful to have English village mystery? Aren't English villages wonderful?" Yeah, well,
We do a good job in suburbia. A
yeah,
good job of
and
suburbia. What's he heading back to do?
Oh, Peter?
Yeah.
Well, he goes back to, there's prime piece of real estate in this funny little peninsula, very close to the third largest and growing major city in Australia, the CBD. It's the showgrounds of which his parents are members. So he goes there to basically see if there's any problems with the sort of a huge development on there. And I don't think development's bad. I think change and progress is good. That's what actually gives people opportunity. So it's not
slightly complicated by the fact that his parents are on the show society.
Yes, yeah. Sometimes space isn't just using it; it's understanding it and understanding what may be within that space. And the idea of people having a finite time and realising it. I think when he sees his father, and his father is an old man, and there's nothing quite like the shock you get when you see your parents and they're old, because that means you're old. And no matter what age you are, they're always your parents. They're always the the people who sort of cuddled you and looked after you and bathed you and washed you and cared for you. And now they're getting old. And that is something I always found that about my parents, because they were both really big, strong, active people. And I think he, like so many people, have that reaction, well, I'll get used to it in a minute and I'll just focus on something else, and then they won't seem so old. But his father and his mother, I think, understand the concept of the finite nature of life. And his father especially does that, and he wants to, in his own way, I guess, recognise and say that the men he fought in the Korean War with and died meant something more. And his idea is not having names on a cenotaph or a piece of stone, as worthy as they are. In his own way, he wanted to give them a living memory in the houses he built. And my dad always said that a home is where you live with people you love, and a house is just a house. It's where people live. But a home means something. I thought, well, that's a nice little... I mean, it's a very sentimental book, but it's...
It is sentimental. There are layers upon layers of nostalgia in this book. Peter at one point asks, can you have a memory inside a memory? I wonder if there's such a thing as too much nostalgia. People are kind of hard on nostalgia these days. Do you think we can have too much? Do we need to bathe ourselves in nostalgia in order to sort of have a sense of ourselves?
Well, as long as you dry yourself off, that's the main thing. You can have a dip in nostalgia, but you don't want to drown in it, because when you do that, you just create falsehoods out of what was. I mean, it's like saying everything was wonderful in the 50s. Well, it wasn't. There was a wool crisis. There was a really vicious Korean War. There was a vicious political split. There was a lot of uncertainty with the atomic age. There was lots of narrowness. There was sectarianism in this country. But at the end, there was that relaxed, comfortable, glorious, endless summer feeling about Australia when everyone was sort of putting great things in the national photo album. Every year there was a sort of an Olympic record holder or someone won Wimbledon, and that sort of sepia-toned idea of Australia. And that's a nice
That's
thing to
what
think
stayed
about.
with us, though,
yes,
isn't it? That's
so you
what's
can't,
that's
but
the
you can't,
hue.
yeah, you can't just accept good things and the lovely things that happened and say, well, that's what history is. That's what nostalgia is. Nostalgia isn't history. Once you get those two mixed up, then you'll end up in a very bad place. And you if you don't actually accept responsibility for history, I think what that happens, you create conditions for a really nasty bite in the national bum, because then you sort of peddle falsehoods as truths and you get completely mixed up.
Do you see that happening in public life in Australia at the
It happens
moment?
in every country, because no matter what the national character of whatever society you talk about, we're all human. We all have that ability to get those two things mixed up, nostalgia and history. There's nothing wrong with sentimentality. There's nothing wrong with nostalgia, but you've just got to remember that they aren't the be-all and end-all.
So what happens to Peter when he bathes himself in that nostalgia, when he heads back home? He's there on a secret mission.
Yeah.
He's there to lay the potential foundations of a development in the middle of the showgrounds. You say that it's about him finding love again by going home. Has he lost love?
He's lost the idea of sharing himself. He loves his family, like so many people do, men or women. They love their family, but they just forget the idea of a good life, I think, is to share yourself with other people. It doesn't mean you have to bear all every day, every minute of the day, but you've just got to actually share some of yourself, because when you share your life with other people, that's what makes a healthy family, that's what makes a healthy life, that's what makes a healthy society. And I like him a lot because he actually comes to this realisation that he is sort of blessed without even knowing it, and he tells lies, and he's there through slyness and his ineptitude at lying.
He doesn't strike me as a bad man at all
No, he's not.
in your writing of him.
No, he's just a normal
It's kind
person.
of great getting inside the head of someone who's doing this work in the context of his own home. Like
Yeah.
so often we think of the developers as sort of, no, I don't want to, they don't have any connection to place. They're just there to make a buck. But he's there to form all sorts of connections.
Well, he inadvertently he comes to understand how fortunate and lucky he is, and I think that's more entertaining and fun, being dragged unwittingly and sometimes unwillingly to a realisation than actually going on a deep search, a quest. There's too many people on friggin' quests for my liking, be it for a ring or a goblet or whatever, or the truth. I mean, no, I don't want to.
Oh, that old thing.
Oh, I want the truth. Get out of it, So I think it's very, and it's a fun book. It is.
I mean, it is
it's
fun.
funny,
Even
I
Australasian
don't
Post makes a cameo, which hailed me.
know. Mr. Wisdom's Whopper.
I used to sell that. Doing a paper round. I was living in Canberra at the time as a kid, and we used to sell it at Duntroon.
You used to sell the
They'd drop us kids off in a van with Australasian Post.
You used to
God
sell
knows,
Australasian Post at Duntroon. That's a story.
and newspapers. Unbelievable. Anyway, that's my little glimpse of Australasian Post. But there's a great love. You have a great affection for, well, Australian absurdity.
Yeah, I guess I do. I mean, a lot of people would say that Australia's bland and aspirational and characterless, that we cling to the fringes of the sea because we're too scared to look inward. We live on the veranda, all that sort of stuff. Maybe there's some part of it's true, but I mean, I'm not going to put my hand on my breast and say, I love this country.
Go on.
Well, I don't think I will. It's not my bag, but
No.
I have a great affection for it. I think we're a really good, moderate country. And we're not great. We don't do things
Have we
well all the
have we
time.
forgotten that about ourselves in
Yeah.
terms of the conversation that happens in the media, on Q&A?
Oh, of course. I mean,
We're not very kind to ourselves anymore.
Well, no, we either think because someone wins some sporting contest that we're the greatest nation of all time and masters of the universe,
You
or
love
then we
sport.
suddenly sort of run around like headless chooks and the sky's falling. It's moments like that you think, yeah, we are a small people in an isolated country with no idea of how the rest of the world lives, because the rest of the world would look at us and say, man, have they got it good? And yet we continuously disappear up our own clackers and just sort of say the lights are going out. Well, if we get our heads out of our asses and see just what it is that we've achieved, which is a pretty progressive, moderate nation, which incrementally I think moves in the right direction. Not all the time. Sometimes we go sideways, sometimes we go back. Since, European colonisation, there's a lot of baggage. But I think we're dealing with that maybe not as fast as some people would like. But I think we have a tendency to get to the right place eventually. And I think we just have to back ourselves a little bit.
Does Peter get to the right place
Yeah, I think
at the
he
end of
does.
his trip back home?
Yeah, I think he actually tries to tell the people that matter how important they are to him. And you can get through life using tricks and methods by which you draw people to open up to you. But the real glory of life, as my dad said, is sharing your life with someone, because he said it's just like the bomb going off. It's wonderful. There's no light like it. And he said maybe some people don't find it, some people waste it, some people lose it. But if you've ever had it, you know just how wonderful it is. And it's a brief journey we have, really, when you look at it. And we think it stretches on forever. We think we've always got a mortgage to pay. We think there's always another summer, another Christmas we have to put up with. But it ends one day. And I think celebrating life by sharing it with somebody, and on a personal level, on a public level broadly, is the way to go. Mm. Now can I do some funny voices from Parliament?
Please do.
I can do Malcolm Turnbull. This is the thing, Natasha. He's the Thurston Howell III of Australian politics. I love Malcolm. Everyone loves Malcolm. And there's There's Tony. Wayne Swan's good. I was driving over the Westgate Bridge, and he said, "Fair dinkum, Mr. Speaker, it would make a cat laugh." And he said it twice, like, "Oh, this is gold." Algin Albanese, they're all there. Tony Burke is very good. Tony Burke with his clutch cargo way of speaking like that and his greying Tony Curtis haircut. And of course there's Craig Emerson.
What about Stephen Smith?
Oh, Wolfman, the politest Wolfman. Yes, interesting. Oh, don't you reckon that temple hair? That's what happened to Eddie Munster. He grew up and became a very pleasant Stephen Smith.
Can you do any women?
No.
Get your drag on.
No, you can't. I can't do that. Do Julie. I saw Julie Bishop on the TV, and it looked like a cross between Bewitched and Battlestar Galactica. But she, you can make fun of people, but they've got real ability. If you can laugh at people, but all those guys and gals, they have real ability. Well, most of them have. I mean, she cops a lot of stick because she's sticking her head up there, rightly or wrongly. But I'd say 90% of the people that go into politics on either side do it for the right reasons. They're very capable people and they have a desire to serve. And, yeah, they stick their head up and you can make fun of them. But, by and large, they serve us pretty well.
But I just wonder, in the era of the rubbery figures, it was so much more loving. The parody was a loving one. Now, what was it, In Bed with Julia? Was it In Bed with Julia?
Oh, that was not good. I mean, I don't want to bag anything, but that's not satire.
Where's the fine line for you?
Well, you got to cut. I mean, I think you've got to actually recognise that people aren't exactly what they portray in their public persona. So there's little bits and pieces of truth, but they're bad actors, I reckon. And I'm an expert on bad acting. Politicians perform. They act. I don't think
Too much.
Well, probably too
much.
much.
Too much acting.
Yeah, too much. I mean, if you just cut loose and say what you believe.
A great actor is one where you don't think they're acting.
Yeah, but not everyone's a great actor.
There's an authenticity. Yeah, but we want great actors, don't we?
Well, I don't know. I mean, do you? I mean, I just want
real people.
Yeah.
William McInnes, thank you for joining us on Life Matters.
Well, you've got a real
National.
person in me with my turned-up rod and gun polo shirt.
You do.
It's shocking, isn't it?
Rod and gun.
It sums me up in one, doesn't it?
Roots and leaves.
Yeah, rod and gun, and it's just like smug middle-class man. That's a superhero I could play.
And I'll do one more thank you. And William McInnes, thanks for joining us on Life Matters. I'll say...
Oh, you're doing it because you're doing... sorry.
We're doing noddies, the equivalent of noddies.
Oh, I see, for this thing.
No, not for this.
Smug middle-class man.
I'll just go on that note. William McInnes, thank you for joining us on Life Matters.
Well, Natasha, it's always a pleasure to come in here to the wonderful ABC and speak to you.